What's up guys? Quickly before we get started, I wanted to thank you all for watching and remind you to like and subscribe. Enjoy the video! Your world as you knew it is fading. Where there was once a thriving utopia filled with content citizens and cutting-edge tech, there's now only rubble and violence. An evil overlord has ousted this once thriving society and replaced it with a brutal slave-backed dictatorship where all who don't conform get dismantled. What's left of your kind has banded together to make a last stand against these oppressors while the memory of what was still lingers. Will they succeed in their valiant effort against this great foe? Fuck no. Those clueless idiots are more likely to blow themselves up than to make a dent in this war. You though, you're just the kind of badass that we need. Now take up this epic fucking rocket launcher and get the fuck out there and see if you've got what it takes to blow these assholes up. Well, in 2003, you got to be this very badass when Swingin' Ape Studios released the sci-fi action gem Metal Arms: Glitch in the System. Metal Arms takes place on the planet of Ironstar, which is a world solely inhabited by droids and other robotic creatures. For eons, Ironstar and its citizens would prosper, allowing science and culture to thrive in the urban metropolises littering the surface. This all changed, however, when one of the lead scientists in this civilization, named Dr. Exivolt, would take this progress too far. He dreamed to evolve the droid race by pushing them beyond their limits and to new heights. Disaster struck, however, when in his misguided experiments, he created a robot more evil and destructive than any before, who was simply known as General Corrosive. In seemingly no time, Corrosive and an army of militarized bots known as the Mills had destroyed the lab he was created in and begun a campaign of terror across Ironstar, leaving the civilization in ashes and no trace of the once great Dr. Exivolt to be found. It's years after these events that our story starts in Droid Town, the last bastion of droid freedom left untouched by the war. Here, all that remains of the free droid population are organized by General Alloy in the fight to free their people and planet. While they've put up a good fight so far, they don't have the necessary weapons or manpower to seriously pose a threat to Corrosive, and they're near collapse. That all changes when on a scouting mission, they find our main character, a bot named Glitch, who was turned off and broken in the ruins of former civilization. Glitch seems different than the other droids, as he has a strange marking of some sorts on his head, suggesting a mysterious past. Glitch also appears far more capable in combat than his comrades as well, which is convenient, as he's essentially the last hope the droids have left at winning this war. It's here, armed with nothing but a mining laser and some friends at your side, that our journey begins. What follows is an epic 15 or so hour sci-fi shooter that'll see you hack, race, and fly your way through every layer of Ironstar and beyond to find out what happened to Dr. Exivolt and to save the droids from their dark fate. The story on offer in Metal Arms was actually pretty solid. It mixes sci-fi worlds like Halo with a grim Terminator-like future, and then throws in some wild and vulgar comedy from something like Conker's Bad Fur Day to lighten the tone. Somehow, while doing all this and simultaneously retaining a T for Teen rating, it crafts a feel of its own that stands out to this day. The many memorable characters of this world, like General Corrosive and Colonel Alloy, stuck out to me and had brilliantly unique designs. The locations you explore, like ancient ruins and far-out space stations, are varied and span seemingly the entirety of the planet and beyond, giving the game a real momentum as you progress. The voice acting for the most part was top tier, with only a few outlier low points, like occasional lines cutting off before they finish, dulling the experience. The setting of the story was also really engaging, with tons of mysteries to uncover, leaving you in suspense, looking for answers up to the last moment. It's on the level-to-level basis, however, that I found more issues on the narrative end. Throughout many levels, the most story you'll get is a few dialogue lines and a basic 15-second cutscene of a conversation or of you getting into a car. For me, it felt like it took long periods of time for the story to progress to anything meaningful, and on top of that, some of the story beats are left completely unanswered by the time the credits roll. This leaves you with an interesting toss-up. On one hand, the concept, comedy, and levels you explore are all brilliant, But on the other hand, the actual story you'll be experiencing from a level to level basis felt incredibly bare bones for decent chunks of the game. With all aspects considered, I'd say that I was left with an overall positive experience, but I felt that especially around the midpoint, the game could drag a bit story-wise. After the narrative though, we move on to what I thought was the greatest aspect of this hidden gem, in the combat. This title is a third-person shooter, as I'm sure you've noticed, and outside of a few sections that deviate from that formula, you'll spend a majority of your time as Glitch, fighting through a variety of enemies face to face. Since the game relies so heavily on this combat, then it really needed to get it right, and luckily in this case, it knocks it out of the park. See, throughout the course of Metal Arms, you'll collect around 9 different weapons and 5 different grenades. The weapons you'll see will range from your typical machine gun and the spew, all the way to something more outlandish, like the control tether, which will allow you to hack into enemies and control many of them in-game. The grenades, on the other hand, range from flaming magma or EMP grenades, all the way to recruiting ones that allow you to make allies out of your foes. This variety of weapons was extremely fun to experiment with, and offered nearly endless ways to dispatch combatants. Every enemy had a different weakness that could be exploited by utilizing certain weapons, and discovering this mid-combat was always a blast. Blowing up one with a rocket launcher and EMP grenade, then switching to a longer range gun and scope, like the explosive rivet gun, just to finish off some airborne foes, made every encounter into a real war zone. Then we get on to the varied list of combatants you'll face on these war grounds. Metal Arms actually has over 13 different enemy types to face off throughout its campaign. This is honestly above and beyond what it had to do in my opinion, as many other shooter games in the genre don't come close to matching that tally. Most of these enemies carry different weapons from each other and pose distinct threats on top of this. The Titan, for example, is a hulking mech armed with rockets, machine guns, and a stomp that can decimate foes. The Scientist, however, can suck health from you at a range, and heal its fellow enemies on the battlefield. The sheer variety of enemies you'll encounter in single fights is actually wild, and you're going to be blown away by what I have to share next. Remember that tether gun I mentioned earlier that can hack into enemies? Well, just about all those 13 plus enemies I just mentioned are hackable, allowing you to take control of them and utilize their own unique weapons and movement abilities in battle. This makes for seemingly endless ways to replay any level, as with all these weapons and nearly every enemy available for hacking, the possibilities open for you to experiment are infinite. It's honestly hard to think of any shooter games, third person or first, that have such a varied list of tools of war. I went back to levels many times just to experiment with these tools and test out different methods of destruction. I could seriously go on and on talking about the variety on offer here, as there's also vehicles and turrets to use, as well as power-ups to be found on every map. But I'll just say, this game's combat is fantastic, and is more deep than many of its peers for sure. Now with all these options, you'd think that the game would be pretty easy, but no. In fact, it's actually the opposite of that. Metal Arms can actually be brutally hard at times, as you have limited health that doesn't recharge on its own, and many enemies will be armed with the same or better weapons than the ones you're given. On top of that, you'll have to fight up to or more than 15 enemies in a single room at times, making for a chaotic and tough experience on almost every difficulty provided. Then, you'll be thrown into massive boss fights that are scattered throughout the game and require you to be precise, quick, and clever to even stand a chance of surviving. All this will mean that you'll be pushed to your limits and teetering on death very often on the harder difficulties. There are ways of healing via health packs around the map or upgrades to your health in general, but even with that, some enemies can pose a deadly challenge. I played the game on normal difficulty, and I could say it provided a good enough opposition for all but the most hardcore of fans. It felt just about right in most fights, to where you were forced to think about positioning and ammunition to conquer an encounter, but not punished with no way of overcoming the odds. Turning the difficulty up to the hardest one, called Nuts and Bolts, is truly a challenge for a madman though, as you can be obliterated in seconds if you aren't careful. I would compare it to Halo's famous Legendary mode, and say at times it may push beyond that, as at least in Halo, you have rechargeable shields. Overall, I thought the combat was one of the greatest aspects of this game, and that's good because you're going to be doing a lot of it through this beastly 42 mission campaign. Luckily, the developers managed to provide varied encounters, enemies, weapons, and even new story beats that'll make no level feel too repetitive even on follow-up playthroughs. Now while the gunplay of the game excels, the combat does fall short in other minor areas, such as the movement mechanics. The movement in this game seems to be linked almost entirely to your momentum. That may sound cool at first, but when I describe it in practice, you'll begin to realize why it's the opposite of that. Momentum-based movement here means that without long run-ups, you'll fail to move more than a foot or two forward when jumping. This makes movement in tighter areas of the game feel a bit clunky, as you aren't given the room to build up the momentum required to get some distance on jumps. Now when you do have momentum, the world begins to feel like it's covered in an oil slick or wet moss, as when you land, you end up sliding way past the distance you wanted to. This made some simple platforming sections, like the one in this clip, into a much bigger challenge than they realistically needed to be. As you play the game, you get more used to this wonky system of movement, and at times, in the few wide open spaces provided, it can even feel good. But for the most part, it was just a bit of an annoyance behind otherwise stellar combat. There aren't many actual platforming sections of the game though, so at least the developers didn't subject us to the torture that might have been if they had included more. Outside of that issue, I did find a few others, but again I'll say these were pretty minor in my opinion. First, I noticed that some voice lines would cut out a bit early while running around the world. Luckily, they usually cut out partway through the last word, so you don't really miss anything, but it can detract a bit from the quality and immersion of a title. Next, I'm pretty sure that they got another voice actor to play Glitch in one cutscene, randomly, as you can see here.
I'm Glitch. Listen, I'm chasing this grunt who's heading to the Mill Crater compound. Can you show me where the compound is?
Sorry, Agent Shush. Yeah, Dr. Exavolt is being held in the Mill City Tower.
My guess is they added that in after the initial recordings and couldn't manage to get David Wittenberg, the actor behind Glitch, to come back in just for that line. I hear at the time of development, Swingin' Ape Studios was on its last legs financially, so it makes sense that a few bits of polish may be missing like this. Lastly, the frame rate did drop a few times in combat, making the game chug slightly, but never enough to really hamper your experience or gameplay. See, I chose to play Metal Arms on the original Xbox, as from what I've seen online, it looks like it, along with the Xbox 360 port, are the best looking versions available on consoles. The versions on GameCube and PS2 also play well, and in some regards, like the detail of enemy dismemberment and a PS2 exclusive multiplayer map, might actually fare better, but overall, those versions lack the sheer performance of the Xbox releases. You can also emulate the game, but I cannot promise a smooth experience if you do so. On every single emulator I tried for this title, the frame rate dropped dramatically. And on a few emulators, like the Xbox one, the lighting and cutscenes would randomly glitch out. This made for what in my opinion was simply a worse experience to play than the physical console versions. Emulators are, however, getting better all the time, and the GameCube Dolphin emulator actually has a thriving modding community whose Discord I will link in the description, so I wouldn't totally write off these versions yet. There are actually some graphical overhaul mods in that Discord too, that make the game look fantastic, so maybe check them out if you're interested and keep an eye out for any performance improvements in the future. Now we can move on to talking about another system that sets Metal Arms apart from shooters of its time, in the collectibles. There are two major collectibles in Metal Arms that will each be found in various ways throughout your journey. The first of these are the secret chips. In almost every level, there will be 3 or 4 of these hidden, To find them all, you'll have to explore every dark corner and back alley of each map. These were a fun little distraction from the core gameplay, as they required you to either explore and platform in unexpected areas, or in some cases even do something as interesting as speedrun the level to get them. After collecting certain amounts of these chips, you'll unlock extra multiplayer maps to play on, making them more than just a cosmetic afterthought, adding some incentive to collect them all. The next collectibles we're looking at are the washers, which serve as a kind of currency in the game, similar to the ones you'd find in platformers or the LEGO games. When you kill enemies, these washers will occasionally drop, and in addition, you can find them scattered throughout the levels. With these washers, you'll be able to go to one of the stores that are hidden throughout the levels to buy a number of different useful items. These range from ammo and healing items all the way to literal guns and powerful upgrades for them. That's right, you can actually upgrade every gun in the game around 3 times over the course of your playthrough. And you're gonna need to, as many foes will actually get stronger throughout the campaign and acquire upgrades on their arsenals too. This upgrade system, be it upgrading your health with batteries or your weapons with parts, served as a secondary form of progression through the campaign, and really allowed to feel that you were growing more powerful as the game went on. You start the campaign with a lowly mining laser that has unlimited ammo, but does about as much damage as a wet pool noodle would to enemies. Eventually though, you'll progress in the game all the way to something like the fully upgraded rocket launcher, which shoots out 4 guided missiles dealing destruction to anyone who dares cross your path. Managing washers so that you can buy items from the store was a vital mechanic of the game, as it kept the balance of power just manageable in combat. The store also served another purpose too, as even after you finished upgrading and unlocking new weapons, the store could serve as a safe zone mid-fight where you could refresh for round 2. All in all, I really enjoyed the collectibles and upgrade mechanics that Metal Arms had. It gave the game some slight RPG elements, which most other shooters at the time lacked. In a way, I think Metal Arms was a bit ahead of its time in this aspect, as it's only in recent generations that RPG elements have become commonplace in shooter games and genres outside of the RPG itself. Next, we can talk about the graphics of this title, and what Metal Arms does to separate itself from its peers. I'll say, starting off, that Metal Arms, in my opinion, is a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to the graphics department. At times, like in the futuristic hologram and flying car-filled Mill City, the game looks great and can actually make you want to stop and take it all in for a moment. At other times, however, like in the ruins of the planet, the game can be kinda ugly in all honesty. It's not that I think the textures and effects aren't good enough either, because honestly for the time, they're solid. It's more that the level design and color palette in these sections is just really uninspired. Levels like the Sniper's Lair are essentially just piles of brown rusty blocks scattered randomly everywhere. Luckily for all of us though, these brown blob levels only accounted for 3 or 4 of the 42 levels in the campaign, so by the end of your runtime, you'll hardly remember them. What I haven't touched on yet are the dismemberment and destruction mechanics in Metal Arms. Swingin' Ape Studios, in an attempt to keep this game at a T for Teen rating, happened to make one of the best choices they could in allowing this title to stand out. They decided to make all characters and enemies in the game robots. This affected the title on nearly every level, as it gave it a distinct story, art style, and the ability to include a mechanical dismemberment system. When fighting enemies in Metal Arms, you can actually blow many of their limbs off, leaving them permanently crippled in an almost Fallout-esque way. This system was shockingly detailed, as it could completely affect nearly everything an enemy could do. If you cripple an enemy's gun arm, for example, it would begin to flail around wildly, meaning when they shoot, the bullets would fly all over the place instead of being aimed. This meant battles would end up looking hilariously epic at times, as flailing bullets would fly across the screen and a random pair of legs without a body would go sprinting past you. This also affected the robots you can hack, and made fights with them a lot more interesting, as your remote-controlled ally would begin to fall apart mid-battle. In addition to this, Swingin' Ape Studios also included some world destructibility. This came in the form of destructible bridges, doors, and wires that served as an extra way to dispatch your foes. Especially at the beginning of the game, you're given many opportunities to use vehicles and weapons like the Ripper, a saw-blade launching gun, to cut wires on platforms, knocking them down, or to blow up looming bridges, causing enemies to topple to their doom. This added yet another layer to the world, and to many fights, leading to yet more replayability and freedom to approach the world how you want to. Finally though, I'll get on to the epic soundtrack that backed this forgotten gem up. Keith Rem, a prominent figure that has been involved with titles from EverQuest to Call of Duty and even Yakuza, created this electronic banger of a soundtrack. The songs here are mostly upbeat or electronic bangers that power you through many tense encounters the game has to offer. I really loved the music here, as I felt it fit the sci-fi, nuts and bolts world perfectly. Each track gave more atmosphere to a level, making something like swerving through a deadly car race or exploring an underground ruins feel that much more epic than it otherwise would have. Something about the late 90s and early 2000s electronic music of this era has always stood out to me as cool as hell. This game, along with titles like Freelancer, SSX Tricky, Jet Set Radio, and Timesplitter's Future Perfect, have such awesome driving soundtracks that they go beyond typical backing music and give their titles a true personality that stands the test of time. That sheer cool factor oozes all over this title and helps it stand above many others that may even be well more remembered to this day in the genre. Some songs I loved were Mill City Night Vision, the title track, and Wasteland Chase. And that, folks, just about sums up my thoughts on this 2003 hidden gem. If you're a shooter fan and have a PS2, GameCube, Xbox, or 360, I highly recommend you pick this title up, as despite its occasional flaw, it truly is one of the best shooters of its time. It even comes with a robust multiplayer mode featuring 14 or 15 maps, 7 game modes, and tons of vehicles and weapons to use. This package is truly only rivaled by the likes of games like Timesplitters in terms of content, and even those games' campaigns don't clock in at anywhere near as long as this title. Metal Arms just about rivals its peers in terms of quality of combat and atmosphere, and then goes and gives you way more value than those peers in terms of sheer content as well. With all that and a banger soundtrack, I simply have to say that this title stands the test of time, and that anyone interested should give it a shot. For all these reasons and more, I'm giving Metal Arms Glitch in the System an 8.5 out of 10.
Will the party or parties responsible for releasing all of the experimental loony bots please return them to their pens? They are shooting the employees.